morning, APUSH people. We are going to just go through a couple of pages of notes because we've only got Friday in class. I'm not going to give you guys anything for Thursday because that's our PSAT day. So we're going to pick it up back on page 2 of the Era of Good Feelings notes where we left off yesterday. And remember that Era of Good Feelings, God, my hair is crazy. Remember that Era of Good Feelings is in quotes, which means probably not really an era of good feelings. So on page 2, we ended up yesterday kind of breaking down those 3 really important statesmen: Calhoun from South Carolina, Webster from New Hampshire, that represents the North, and Clay, who is from Kentucky. And each one of them will represent their section of the country. And this is what we'll be getting into in this upcoming time period, what's going to be called the sectionalization of the United States. It has nothing to do with sports, I promise. But what happens and why this era of good feelings is in quotation marks is that after this time period, instead of our country growing together, we kind of are going to start pulling apart based on what's in the best interest of the section of the country that I live in. And each one of these statesmen represent that area. So that's what we'll be looking at. So we were talking about Henry Clay's American system. Yesterday we talked about the bank, the bus, and the tariffs. And now we're going to talk about a really important part of that. Probably the most important part of that whole American system is internal improvements. And again, for those of you that have a little better working knowledge of government and all that, this would be what we would call today infrastructure: roads, bridges, and in this time, canals, all those things that make the movement or internally improve the United States. Now the federal government does take a part of that, but this time period that we're looking at is really kind of wishy-washy. Who's supposed to do that? So internal improvements. And this is the one that's really important that I told you, if you really were paying attention a couple of days ago, that you've got to learn a lot of stuff in this class about legislation that does not pass. Sometimes it's as important as the stuff that does pass. And these internal improvements that in your parentheses you see fail to pass will come back and haunt the United States time and time again. Now it's going to haunt the South in a good way during the Civil War because they didn't do all these things, which leads to their defeat. But anyway, so back in our notes, page 2, C, internal improvements. Congress passed Calhoun's bonus bill, would have given funds for states for internal improvements. So Calhoun says, yep, we need to improve. Madison vetoes it, saying that it's unconstitutional. So we're back in that Constitution thing. His successor, Monroe, also vetoes the legislation. Jeffersonians opposed direct federal support of interstate internal improvement, saw it as something that the states should take care of themselves. New England was opposed to federally built roads and canals. Why? Because they think it's going to drain away their population. And again, this is this sectional divide that instead of New England thinking what's in the best interest of all of the country, they think about what's in the best interest of New England. And while that's important for our elected officials to care for what's in the best interest of our state, ultimately, it should always be about what's in the best interest of the entire country. It takes us a long time to figure that out. But at this time period, everyone's so entrenched in their own little, what's going to benefit me? So ultimately, this doesn't pass. Prior to the Civil War, most internal improvements were done at the expense of state and local governments. And some of those state and local governments did do the improvements, some will not. And it, again, impacts the economy. Like, you can't move goods around if there's not roads, canals, bridges, and if all those things aren't taken care of. So make sure you remember Henry Clay's American system. Bank of the U.S. passes. Internal improvements does not pass. Tariffs pass. Those are the ones that you need to remember. So now we're getting into the bottom of page 2, the era of good feelings. And this is James Monroe is now our president. again from Virginia. So 4 of our first 5 presidents are from Virginia. The death of the federal party, again, we keep saying this, but it's really happening. The Federalist liabilities, again, the biggest one is that disloyalty during the War of 1812. They are very seen as very disloyal, even though nothing really happened with the Hartford Convention. Just the fact that they planned it gives them this disloyalty. Extremely sectional, extremely, like, of the 3 groups, they are the most concerned, mostly because they can see the writing on the wall. This opening of the West is just going to send all their population flooding out into those areas. Jefferson had adopted many of their important ideas, and so they really didn't have much left. Jefferson was very pragmatic, very practical, and keeping the Federalist ideas that were good and tossing away the ones that weren't. And so they really didn't have anything else to add to the conversation. They took the Jeffersonians kept the Hamilton plan, loose construction, so there really wasn't anything else for them to add. The era of good feelings, top of page 3, number 3, you do need to know this, how we came up with this little era of good feelings thing. It was a term coined by a newspaper writer following Monroe on his 1817 inspection of military bases. So we'll have a lot of these phrases that will come from newspapers, which is also important to note. So on page 3, we got a big giant box around era of good feelings, somewhat of a misnomer. A misnomer just means a fancy word for misnamed, if you want to change that. Serious issues divided the nation. So our second DBQ, after we finish up this French and Indian War in our next chapter, the very first one that we're going to write all on our own will be, to what extent was the era of good feelings really an era of good feelings, right? So you need to make a note, because this is what you need to come back to. The most important one is number 1. That is the biggest issue that's going to come out, this emerging sectionalism. And again, nothing about sports. It sectionalizes the United States, and it begins pulling them apart. So instead of, after the war, that nationalism, and this is, again, friends, why I say nationalism is not a good thing. Nationalism never pulls people together. Patriotism pulls people together and rally, and we love our country, and we're so proud of our country. Nationalism pulls us apart. It does. It always does. It's a bad word. And that's exactly what's happening with these territories, east or north, west, and south. They're pulling each other apart. Because instead of patriotism binding us all together and saying, what can we do for the best interest of our country? Nationalism says, what can we do for the best interest of our people? Not all people. It's bad. Tariff. Again, the tariff is going to be bad. Internal improvements. Not going to work. The bus. West and South oppose. Bankers in the North. Sale of public lands. The North opposed. South and West in favor. We're getting ready to have another panic. Number 7, slavery. From this part of our course until we're done with the Civil War, slavery is going to impact every single solitary decision that Congress makes. And one of our goals as students is to see the ineptness of elected legislative bodies from 1817 until 1860 to deal with the institution and the issue of slavery. No one wants to do it. We do all kinds of really unconstitutional, strange things to prevent a conversation or legislation about slavery. The issue of slavery in Missouri, and that's going to be our big one that we're going to talk about today. And Republican Party enjoying a one-party rule. Never good when you got one-party rule. So Monroe's presidency oversaw 2 major events. Monroe's presidency, kind of not a lot going on, except C, and you need to know both of these things. The Panic of 1819, which is huge, and the Compromise of 1820, which is gigantic. Okay? So remember what I said about a panic. Economic panic and depression hits in 1819. It is our first real panic since our panic that we had right after the Revolutionary War, which was understandable why we had that one. Look at A2. Henceforth, panics are going to occur every 20 years. 1837, 1857, 1873, 1893, 1907, 1929. You can't possibly know the exact reason of every one of those. And that's why I said, when you're taking a test and you see the panic of 1819, the first, or panic of 1837 or 1857, the first thing in your head you should say, Mrs. Norris said, don't panic, because all of them are about the same thing. Details, minutia, different, but big picture thing, exactly the same. And it is always the same. The cause over speculation. The only minutia is going to change is what we over speculated on. Okay. So causes of 1819 panic, causes of 1837 panic, causes of 1857 panic, causes of 1873 panic. Always over speculation. Always. People over speculate. And what does that mean? They tend to put money into things that they think will create them great wealth. And then it doesn't. And then they're in trouble. Okay? So 1837, 57, 73, almost all of them are going to be about frontier land, right? Everyone's thinking that that frontier land, I'm going to buy it up first and then I'm going to sell it and I'm going to make a whole lot of money. This is like people that flip houses. They speculate that if they take this house in this neighborhood, fix it up and sell it, they're going to make money. Now, I'm going to go into this little, how many minutes am I at? 10. I'm going to go into these types of TV shows. So for those of you that watch this, I hope this really explains what this is about. For those of you that don't watch, just try. So there's two types of shows about flipping houses, right? There are the people that do that for a living. That's Chip and Joanna. It's Our Hometown People. It's Flipping Las Vegas. It's the people on the West Coast that are divorced, not divorced. I don't know. The blonde-haired chick. They make tons of money. Every show, they're making scads of money. I don't think Chip and Joanna make money, but you know what I mean. They know what they're doing. They are professionals at what they do. So there's that show. Then there's the other shows that are called like First Time Flippers or other things, renovation. I don't know. Those shows where people don't know how to do it. And 9 times out of 10, those people end up not making money because they don't know what they're doing. That's why the show's funny, right? First time flippers. They're not going to make money like the Hometown People or any of those flipping Las Vegas. They're just not, because they don't know what they're doing. They speculate that, one, they have skills. They speculate that they understand real estate. They speculate that they understand finances, and they don't. And so they get had. That's what speculation does. You speculate that you're going to make money. Now, people that know how to do it, they do it well and they get money. People that are not, that's when we get the panic. So what happens is people start buying up land, and they buy up all this land in hopes that the price of the land is going to go up, and it doesn't, right? There's just too much land, too much free land, and they end up without. So how does that hurt? Well, people stop paying their bank loans back, right? That's how people and why people get their cars repossessed. That's why there's tax sales in Sullivan County, because the government, the county, the bank repossesses, and they got to get their money back. So I'm hoping that made sense. I think I'm danced around a whole lot of things. But significant deficit in the balance of trade. Bus forced wildcat banks to foreclose on Western farms. That is another alarming statistic, is when farms start to close. Because if farms close, we don't eat. And so that's bad. Bus stop allowing payment in paper, now demanded hard current. That species is hard coin, gold, silver. Farmers don't have that. Banks will call in loans. Farmers don't have it, so they lose their farms. And again, panic. It's a real panic. So at the top of page 4, it resulted in calls for reform and pressure for increased democracy. Like, we got to get these people out that aren't protecting us. Western farmers, please look at C1. I'm at the top of page 4 now, even though I feel like I've been rambling. C1, Western farmers viewed the bank as evil. And that will be, again, what allows this gentleman named Andrew Jackson to come into power as president. Hard hit, poor Clower. And now, instead of calling this Jeffersonian democracy, we're going to get this word Jacksonian democracy. This is where Andrew Jackson. And so this will be some of the things that will happen with land legislation. Eventually, the panic goes away, things go back to normal, and we'll move forward. Monroe reelected in 1820 with, again, almost a unanimous electoral vote. And again, era of good feelings, that everything's going awesome. On page 4, the growing West needs a box around it. And again, I really hope somewhere in your notes that you classify what the West is. The West is Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois. That's the West. So, new state characteristics. These states have a characteristic. Not focused on states' rights. We're nationalists, right? We're in this whole big thing. Heavily dependent on federal government, and contained a wide variety of people from all over. 9 states are going to join between 1791 and 1819. 9 states. If you're looking again for one of the things that the Articles of the Confederation positive about, this is it. How do territories become states? We're still using that Northwest Ordinance and the Land Ordinance in dealing with that. Again, Indiana is going to be one of these. Why do people move west? And we're going to look at this for a long time of people moving west. Westward movement, significant, cheap land, and available land for people who probably could not buy land in other places. Land exhaustion in older tobacco states. Tobacco is one of the crops that seriously depletes the nutrients in the soil. We don't have agricultural science at this time, so we aren't using fertilizers that put nutrients back into the soil. We use the traditional manure, that type of stuff, but not nutrients like what we know and what farmers use today. So once the ground is depleted of those nutrients necessary to grow tobacco, your yield gets smaller and smaller, and it makes it not profitable to even plant, because the yield that you're going to get per acre will not allow you to make money. So we need to push out further to find more fertile ground. Again, speculators are speculating that people are going to be moving out here. The economic depression moves people. I got to get out of the city, make my own way. Most importantly is number 6. There's no more Indians, right? We've killed all the Indians. Battle of Fallen Timbers, Battle of Tippecanoe. It's paved out here. And then on the bottom of page 4, number 7, which we'll talk about in our next chapter, the Cumberland Road. Cumberland Road, which is Highway 40 that goes right through Terre Haute, from Maryland to Illinois, the steamboat, and canals. We have actual ways to move now, which will be important. Top of page 5, West still remained weak in population. We're not going to have the population that will give us political representation in the House that will really allow the West to have its own strength. So what the West will use as their strength is they're the pivot in this pull between the North and the South. The North and the South are going to court the support of the West. So that's the only real political strength that the West has in joining with one of the others in opposition to the other. So now, on page 5, we will get one of the most significant and important works of legislation to either way you see it, to prolong slavery, to prevent warfare, however you want to look at it. It's the Missouri Compromise of 1820. It is a significant piece of legislation. The word compromise is really important in this because it is a compromise, and it is a compromise about slavery. It is a compromise for those people who do not want to take on the hard issue of how a country birthed in democracy enslaves human beings. So we're going to look at what this is about. Missouri is now asking to come into the Union. Now, all of those states that I just mentioned, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, remember they're all above Ohio. So there's no question about, are they a slave state? Are they not? Because the land ordinance said there could not be slavery above the Ohio River. Now we're moving out, and Missouri doesn't fit anywhere in that criteria. States have to write a constitution to join the union. They have to have a state constitution, which has to be approved. And so that's part of the issue. There is part of the Missouri application or petition for statehood included this Talmadge Amendment, which says no more slaves in Missouri, and that there would be gradual emancipation of children born to enslaved people there already. So and what this says is if there were enslaved people in Missouri, their children would be born free. So as soon as all of the slaves or the people that were enslaved in Missouri died, there would be no more slaves. That's called gradual emancipation. It was probably one of the only ways that we could have gotten rid of slavery without a civil war, which would have been obviously a much better deal. Southerners are going to go bat crap crazy. They view that as a threat to their sectional balance, because if slaves go away, what happens to their population? It greatly diminishes, and then as does their representation. Jefferson, this is his fire bell in the night. You are going to see that quote a lot without any reference. You need to know that fire bell is the ringing bell of slavery. Jefferson, who is a slave owner, is saying this thing called slavery is a fire bell to wake us up. It's going to send us into chaos. And he was 1,000% correct. So, concerned by the fast increase in Northern population and the economy and the political balance in the House of Representatives. Here's the sad part about the issue of slavery and enslaved people. It actually all comes down to a balance of power in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And that's what the South is striving for. And ultimately, sadly, that's what the North is going to be working for too, is that we have this balance, that one of those sections does not get more powerful than the other. Now, the South worries about it more because if the North gains that power, they can work to abolish slavery. And the South is going to do everything they can to keep this balance of power. From 1820 to 1860, for 40 years, that's what's going to happen. And the thing they're balancing are enslaving human beings. Don't ever lose sight of that. So the future of the slave system is very concerning to Southerners. Missouri, first state west of the Mississippi, made from the Louisiana Purchase, so we don't have any kind of criteria for slavery, non-slave. So if Congress could abolish slavery in Missouri, it could start to do it in other states. So the South is very alarmed. And the Senate, and again, remember, I told you, you're going to have to know these things that don't pass. The Senate refuses to pass it. So it passes in the House. Why? Because there's more representation there from the North and the West, right? That's based on population. But when you get to the Senate, every state has 2. So there's where we balance that out. And the South, at that point, has more senators, more states. And so it's balanced out. So we come up with this thing called the Missouri Compromise. And at the heart of this, I want you to understand this is compromising on enslaving people. So while we talk about, it's a compromise, it's good, at the bottom of line of this, the compromise is about continuing to enslave people. Please don't lose sight of that. Henry Clay is the mastermind of this compromise. And again, remember, Henry Clay wants to be president of the United States. So his idea of compromise is, I got to keep these people happy because I want to be president. So here's the provision. The provisions would be, we will admit Missouri as a slave state, but we got to find another state to balance that out. So Maine will be admitted as a free state. And therefore, we have balanced the power. Balance 12-12. 12 free, 12 not. And it's going to stay that way for 15 years. Now, hopefully you can see the next problem that's going to occur is what's going to happen for the next state, right? That's why it says 15 years, because then we're going to have another problem. Future slavery, and please, again, If you don't remember anything of the era of good feelings, you have to remember the Missouri Compromise, and you have to remember this statement. Future slavery prohibited north of 3630. So we have drawn another line. So originally, the land ordinance, we drew the line at the Ohio River. Now the Missouri Compromise is going to draw another line. Slavery under here, free states under there. Now, if you look at that line, there's a whole lot more territory above that line than below that line. And also, if you look, Missouri is already north of that line. But the South didn't think, right, wrongfully so, that any of that territory above that line would have been useful farmland. And I'm going to asterisk why, because when Lewis and Clark goes through there, there's no trees. This big, giant territory from about Illinois all the way to the Rockies, where it's just great, awesome, flat, plain land with zero trees, was viewed as unfertile. For the people of that time period, if there was no trees, there was no fertile ground. So the South said, there's no fertile ground up there. There's no trees. We don't need to go that way. So they felt fine with it. Wrong idea. Compromise was largely acceptable by both sides. Why? The South is going to get Missouri. They're going to get their state. The North is going to win concessions about, okay, we're going to draw a line, no slavery above that. They feel good with that. North had the advantage as Spanish territory prevented significant southward. Texas is still owned by Mexico, so we can't go past Texas. Southerners, as I say, nobody's going to want that land. You can't grow anything on it anyway. And at the top of page 6, the legacy of the compromise, and it is gigantic. Okay, the legacy of the Missouri Compromise is gigantic. First and foremost, I want you to think that these men who were elected to represent the people of their state basically folded into this compromise about enslaved people. They put it on a back burner and compromised with the lives of people. It's going to last 34 years. It does preserve the Union until 1854, and we get into this crazy, crazy time of Kansas and Nebraska, and it will be crazy. But as I just stated, they didn't solve anything. If anything, they made this worse because D2, slavery becomes a dominant issue in American politics. Dominant. It will hang over every decision made. South would begin to develop a sectional nationalism of its own. And again, that nationalism is going to lead us right to 1860. And Clay later criticized unfairly, Mrs. Norris says fairly, by Northerners as an appeaser, just doing what he needs to do to make everybody feel okay and not making hard decisions. All right, so we're going to stop there. We should be able to finish these last few pages. These are really just court cases that we're not going to really go that much in depth in on Friday. Don't forget on Friday, we have our SAQ and our quiz, and then we'll finish up these little bit of notes on Friday. Let me know if you have any questions. Those of you that didn't get a reminder from your ACT teacher, don't forget when you take the PSAT on Thursday, you need a calculator. So please bring a calculator with you. And I will not see you on Thursday, except in the hallway, I guess. So I will see you back here on Friday. So have a great Wednesday, and do your best on testing on Thursday, because we always are hopeful for those merit scholars, which we did have one of our students score the top 2% of all juniors in the United States. So that's awesome. Bye, guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you on Thursday. Bye.